The cold command sliced through the first-class cabin like a blade tearing into silence. "Sir, I need you to vacate this seat immediately." The words cracked through the air, pulling dozens of eyes toward the black man sitting in seat 1A, the seat traditionally treated as private territory for the wealthy, the powerful, and the people accustomed to being served like royalty. Ethan Marshall looked up slowly, as though lifting the weight of the entire sky from his shoulders. At 42, his face carried the marks of experience, and his calm gaze made it impossible to know what he was truly thinking. His grey suit fit his strong frame with quiet precision, and the black leather briefcase beside him felt like an extension of his presence. In front of him, a steaming espresso rested untouched, and beyond the window, Chicago shrank under the fading afternoon light. He had no idea that within a few seconds, the dignity he had protected his whole life would be challenged inside a cabin barely a few meters wide. Amanda Lewis, a 27-year-old flight attendant, with neatly tied blonde hair and the kind of trained smile meant to appear pleasant in any circumstance, now looked so cold that even her colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. "This seat must be given up for a VIP passenger. Please move to the economy section," she said, her voice carrying that familiar echo of small authority, the kind so easy to misuse when directed at the wrong person. Ethan looked down at his ticket. 1A bold and clear, purchased 3 weeks earlier without a single mistake. But he understood this moment too well. This was not the first time someone looked at him and judged him with eyes trained not to observe the truth, but to search for whatever confirmed their bias. The cabin shifted with whispers. A young woman in seat 2B lifted her phone instantly, the glow from the screen lighting up her excited face. "Oh my God, drama incoming," she whispered to nearly 1,000 viewers watching her live stream. A heavy-set businessman behind her removed his glasses and muttered, "Here we go again." And Amanda, her smile long gone, stared at Ethan as if he had broken into a mansion where he clearly didn't belong. "Please move immediately so I can do my job," she said, each word dropping like a stone. Ethan set down his espresso, so gently that it made no sound. His hand tightened slightly, not out of anger, but because old memories surged back, memories of all the times he had been pushed aside, simply because he didn't look like someone who belonged there. When he was young and new to the workforce, a security guard once blocked him from entering a meeting room, assuming he was a delivery worker. Another time, a server in an upscale restaurant handed the bill to his white colleague, even though Ethan was the one paying. Those memories had slept quietly inside him for years until this very moment. "I purchased this seat," Ethan said, his voice soft, yet ringing like clashing steel. Amanda clenched her jaw. "Our passenger needs this seat for medical reasons. Please cooperate." From the economy cabin, someone emerged. Harold Benson, 55 years old, with wind-swept silver hair and an unmistakable air of entitlement. He looked at Ethan the way someone might examine an object out of place in an otherwise elegant room. "Is there a problem?" he asked, though the real meaning was clear. "The only problem is you." The live stream spiked. One comment appeared, "Is this racism because it looks like it?" Another said, "This is about to blow up." Someone else wrote, "Zoom in, zoom in." Ethan inhaled slowly, swallowing the wave of emotion rising in his chest like a storm breaking against the shore. He did not want to explode. He did not want to shout. He had spent a lifetime learning not to react in the way people expected from him. He wanted logic, reason, restraint, even when restraint hurt more than anger. Ryan Cooper, the 45-year-old chief attendant, stepped forward. His tall frame curved slightly, the posture of a man used to bowing to those he deemed important, and standing firm only with those he deemed insignificant. He looked at the ticket, then at Ethan, then at Harold. Everything in his expression was decided before he even spoke. "So please move now. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." A familiar phrase, a familiar look, a familiar insult. Ethan scanned the cabin, absorbing the stares of strangers, some sympathetic, some confused, some openly entertained by the unfolding scene. And then something shifted inside him. Not anger, but a deep, eerie calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm, powerful enough to erase everything in its path. Ethan rose. No argument, no protest, no explanation of why he was right and they were wrong. He simply stood up, carrying himself like someone who knew the truth would not end here. Amanda let out a quiet sigh of relief. Ryan nodded with smug satisfaction. Harold Benson smiled, triumphant. But Ethan was not defeated. He was preparing. As he walked out of first class, the live stream continued. Cameras stayed raised, and dozens of eyes followed him. But none of them knew they had just turned the man they dismissed into the center of a storm the airline would never forget. And the sky, once peaceful, was about to tremble in ways no one could imagine. Ethan walked on steady, calm spine, straight gaze sharp. One sentence echoed within him. Just wait. Ethan Marshall entered the economy cabin with a composure so steady, no one could have guessed he had just been humiliated in front of dozens of people, each step carrying both a cold stillness and the heat of a fire burning deep in his chest. He took seat 17C, a cramped spot, between the aisle and a young passenger wearing headphones, completely unaware that a massive injustice had just fallen onto the man beside him. The whispers from first class trickled down like sharp needles, piercing straight into Ethan's pride. The live stream from above was still exploding online, and many passengers in economy began sneaking glances at him, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others secretly taking photos. But Ethan Marshall was not the kind of man who collapsed under stares. He opened his laptop and connected to the priority Wi-Fi, something he never imagined having to use after being thrown out of first class. The screen lit up, reflecting the sharpened focus in his eyes. With only a few swift actions, Ethan logged into the internal system of Pacific Eagle Airlines, using a high-level account no one on this aircraft knew existed. The admin interface opened, fully displaying personnel files, internal regulations, violation reports, discrimination, complaints, customer satisfaction statistics. Everything was right in front of him, and each number poured fuel onto the fire now roaring inside him. 47 discrimination complaints in the most recent quarter. $2.3 million spent on lawsuits. Customer satisfaction plummeting to a red alert level. Ethan scrolled through charts, his mind working like a cold, precise machine. This was no longer about first class or economy. This was about a system rotting from within a system in which he owned 58% of the shares, a system he had dedicated his life and reputation to reforming. The boy who had once been chased out of a hotel lobby because he didn't look like a real guest was now sitting in economy, preparing to rewrite the fate of an entire airline. Beside him, the young man with headphones glanced at the laptop screen, his eyes widening at the sight of the high-level internal interface with the Pacific Eagle logo and the words, "Confidential Access." "Do you work for the airline?" he asked, lowering his headphones. Ethan gave a small smile, neither confirming nor denying. "Let's just say I'm dealing with something important." The young man nodded, curiosity burning in his eyes, but too intimidated to ask more. It made sense. There was something about Ethan that felt simultaneously approachable and distant, gentle, yet carrying a gravity that made people instinctively keep a respectful distance. Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from his assistant social media is exploding. More than 8,000 live viewers. Should we activate the crisis protocol, Ethan looked at the message, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, like the first sign of an approaching storm. He typed back, "Prepare an emergency meeting. Once I land, we begin." Up in first class, Amanda was whispering nervously to Ryan, trying to keep a professional face. She didn't know the camera in row 2B was still pointed directly at her, while the live stream continued narrating every detail. Comments poured in. Who do they think they are? Kicking someone out of a seat he paid for. Cannot believe this is happening in 2024. Zoom in on their faces. Meanwhile, Harold Benson settled into seat 1A with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had just claimed a prize. He made a call bragging about major deals, about power, about people who don't know their place. Every word slipped into the live stream, spreading like wildfire across dry fields. He had no idea that the man he had just dismissed was the one holding power over the very business relationships he was bragging about. As the plane began its descent, the pilot's voice echoed, "We are preparing to land in Los Angeles." But inside Ethan, this flight had only just taken off. He looked out the window, watching the sunset streak across the wing in a bright line that felt like a reminder. Stay calm, observe, remember, and then act. When the wheels touched the runway, that soft shudder felt like the opening cue of a confrontation no one in the crew could possibly predict. Amanda smoothed her hair. Ryan straightened his posture. Harold adjusted his tie. They all believed the situation was over, but Ethan knew it was only beginning. In economy, the man they humiliated simply closed his laptop, his eyes glowing with a look that would have made anyone who saw it shiver. It was the look of a man about to reclaim what was his, with the full power of the sky behind him. The moment the plane stopped at Gate 52B of LAX, the cabin air was still thick with the remnants of injustice. The clicks of unbuckling seatbelts mixed with the furious whispers of passengers who knew they had just witnessed something deeply wrong. Yet none of them realized they were about to witness one of the most shocking power reversals ever to unfold on the floor of Los Angeles International Airport. Ethan Marshall remained seated in 17C, his hands resting lightly on his leather briefcase, his expression far too calm for a man who had just endured a public humiliation. But inside his chest, a cold, controlled energy was spreading, not the explosive rage of someone wronged, but the quiet fire of a man who knew how to wait for the perfect moment. Around him, passengers in economy began to stand. Some looked at him with sympathy, others with the sense that they had just witnessed the beginning of something far larger. The young man beside him gathered his courage. You didn't deserve that. I recorded the part where they kicked you out of seat 1A. If you need the video. Ethan turned, nodded, and offered a small but weighty smile. Thank you. Keep it. We'll need it. The boy shivered slightly, not out of fear, but because he sensed he had just spoken to someone far beyond what he could comprehend. The familiar ding, signaling passengers could deplane, echoed through the cabin. As always, the front rows unbuckled first. But this time, people did not rush out. Many deliberately slowed down, turning their phones toward the first-class exit, where Amanda and Ryan stood rigid and poised, believing the flight had ended perfectly. They had no idea that their every action and every word was preserved across more than 20 different phones. In seat 2B, the live streamer Haley kept her camera raised. Do not leave the live, everyone, we're following this to the end. As passengers began flowing off the plane, Ethan still did not move. He waited like a chess player watching the opponent celebrate, prematurely unaware the real game had just begun. First class gradually emptied. Harold Benson, the man who took Ethan's seat, strutted out of the plane like a victor, loudly discussing million-dollar deals and important meetings. He passed Ethan without a flicker of recognition, never guessing that the man he looked down on held the power to decide the fate of those very deals. Amanda and Ryan followed behind him, wearing the confident expressions of people who believed they had handled a difficult situation. No worry, no guilt, no hint they understood how catastrophically they had messed up. When economy finally began to move, Ethan stood. Every step he took felt deliberate, heavy with purpose, each breath blending into the ambient rumble of the airport, seeping in through the open aircraft door. He did not rush. He walked as though stepping onto a stage. And in truth, a stage was exactly what waited for him. As he entered the jet bridge, he saw a small crowd, gathered phones, raised high faces, filled with anticipation and disbelief. Haley ran toward him, angling her camera. "Everyone, this is him." The man kicked out of first class, even though he had a valid ticket. "Look at him, he's calm in a way that's honestly terrifying." Ethan said nothing. He simply offered a quiet smile, a restrained and icy expression that made Haley's hand tremble as she unconsciously stepped back. A blue-uniformed airport employee rushed forward. "Sir, would you like to file a complaint?" I saw the video. Ethan lifted his hand, a gentle yet decisive gesture. "No. I will handle this with someone higher." "You mean the airport manager?" "No. I want the airline manager." The employee froze for a second, then two before nodding slowly. He recognized something in Ethan's tone, not the angry request of a disgruntled customer, but the command of someone used to wielding authority. The surrounding passengers whispered urgently, "Who is this guy?" "You can tell he's someone important. He's definitely not normal." An elderly woman placed a hand on Ethan's arm. "Son, I hope you get justice. I saw everything." Ethan bowed his head in thanks. His eyes didn't carry the look of a wounded man. They carried the look of someone who had gathered all the information he needed to strike. And then came the moment that sent the entire crowd into chaos. Ethan opened his briefcase, pulled out a sleek white card holder, slid out one card, and handed it to the airport employee. "Have this person meet me immediately." The employee glanced down, and his face drained of color as he read the words, "Ethan Marshall, Chief Executive Officer, Marshall Aviation Group." A shockwave ripped through the crowd like thunder cracking across the terminal ceiling. Haley screamed into her phone, "Wait, what? He's the CEO, the CEO." The live stream exploded. Comments poured in like a flood. COO of the airline. They kicked the chairman out of 1A. Is this a movie? Amanda is done. Ryan is finished. Several passengers gasped, some slapped hands over their mouths. Others spun around to look back at the plane, where Amanda and Ryan were stepping off, blissfully unaware that their careers had just crumbled beneath their feet. Ethan spoke only one sentence, soft as air, yet sharp as a blade. "Bring the station manager here within 3 minutes. We settle this right now." The airport employee sprinted away. Haley zoomed in, her voice, trembling not with fear, but with the thrill of documenting what might become front-page news. Ethan stood in the center of Terminal 5, a man who had been humiliated, removed from his seat, and judged wrongly because of the color of his skin. Yet he was also the man who led the corporation that owned the very airline that wronged him. And now, as hundreds of eyes watched him, and the live stream surpassed 18,000 viewers, Ethan Marshall adjusted his suit sleeve and thought quietly to himself, "Now it's my turn." The gate counter at 52. B, normally just a brief stopping point before passengers hurried to their next flight, had transformed into a full-blown arena. Phones were raised, camera lenses trembled with excitement, and whispers rippled through the terminal like small waves. No one knew exactly what they were about to witness, but everyone could feel something enormous shifting beneath the surface. Ethan Marshall stood at the center of it all, posture, straight expression, composed eyes, cold as steel. He did not need to raise his voice or show anger. His silence alone unsettled the entire crowd. A breathless airport employee rushed over. Mr. Marshall, the station manager. He's on his way right now." His voice shook not from exhaustion, but from the realization that the man standing before him was no ordinary passenger, but someone who could sign an order forcing an entire department into an emergency late-evening meeting. Ethan nodded slightly. He had seen hundreds like this, people who recognized true power when it stood directly in front of them. For a few suspended seconds, the entire terminal seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the hallway, station manager Daniel Ortiz appeared, a 50-year-old man with grey, streaked hair and the weary dignity of 2 decades in the airline industry. He approached with professional politeness, but when he noticed the business card in Ethan's hand, his steps faltered. In that instant, Daniel understood this was not a passenger complaint, but a top-level crisis he could not afford to mishandle, not with hundreds of cameras pointed his way. "Mr. Marshall," he said, his voice instinctively dropping into something between worry and respect. I did not know you were on this flight." "I sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." Ethan raised a hand. "I don't need an apology. I need transparency." Haley, the live streamer, practically screamed to the tens of thousands watching, "Oh my God, did you hear that he's talking like a CEO in a movie?" Daniel glanced nervously at the growing crowd and tried to regain order. "Would you prefer to discuss this in a private room? We can—" "No," Ethan replied immediately, his voice sharp as a blade. "The humiliation happened publicly. The resolution will also happen publicly." A collective gasp swept through the terminal. In aviation, handling a dispute in front of passengers was taboo, but today, taboos had lost their power. Daniel swallowed hard. He knew he could not refuse. And right at that moment, 2 figures stepped out of the aircraft doorway, Amanda Lewis and Ryan Cooper. They were still smiling, still chatting casually, as if the situation had ended perfectly, until they saw Ethan. Until they saw Daniel standing in front of Ethan like an employee reporting to an executive. Until they saw nearly 60 phones pointed directly at them. Amanda's smile vanished instantly. Ryan froze mid-step. Behind them, Harold Benson still carried himself like the center of the universe, even shooting Ethan a mildly annoyed glance. But the arrogance drained from his eyes as soon as he sensed the strange tension pressing down on the air. A passenger whispered, "That's them, the 2 who kicked him out." Another replied, "They're finished." Ethan looked at Daniel. "I want you to tell me why your staff believed they had the authority to remove a paying passenger from a confirmed seat based on personal bias and favoritism." Daniel tried to remain composed. "Mr. Marshall, sir, I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." "I will review a misunderstanding," Ethan repeated, his voice low, yet so sharp it sent a visible shiver through the crowd. "I sat in the seat I purchased. They removed me so he could have it." He pointed toward Harold. "And I want to know who authorized it." Amanda inhaled sharply and tried to recover her composure. "So we were just following procedure." Which procedure? Ethan asked, locking his gaze onto hers so completely that she seemed to wither under it. The procedure of serve people based on how they look, or the procedure of remove passengers who don't look wealthy enough? Someone in the crowd whispered, unable to hold it. Oh my God, that line was brutal. Ryan stepped forward, trying to reassert control. "Mr. Marshall, we didn't know you were. Oh, Ethan, cut in, that is exactly the problem. If I were just another passenger, you still would have done the same thing. That makes it worse, not better." His words hit the terminal like a falling hammer. Haley whispered into her live stream, "That line deserves an Oscar." Daniel exhaled heavily and turned to Amanda and Ryan. "When did you report this incident? Who made the decision to remove the passenger from his seat?" Amanda opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. Ryan swallowed hard. They knew any answer could become a trap. Ethan continued his tone, no longer angry, but burdened with a quiet, profound disappointment. "I built Marshall Aviation Group to transform this industry, to guarantee that all passengers are treated with the respect they deserve. Yet today, I saw the airline owned by my own corporation display the very culture I have spent years trying to eliminate." Some in the crowd lowered their heads, as if feeling the sting of the truth in his voice. Ethan continued, "Daniel, I want every staff member involved present in the emergency meeting within 20 minutes. And notify LAX's executive office. The internal investigation begins immediately." Daniel nodded, tension tightening his face. "Yes, Mr. Marshall." Then came the final blow, subtle yet devastating. Ethan turned to Harold Benson, now pale. "As for you, you thought you won by taking my seat. But unfortunately for you, you just pushed your own career off a cliff." Harold stumbled backward slightly. "Wait, you're not saying you're going to I'm not going to?" "Do anything," Ethan replied, his voice the temperature of ice. "I'm simply doing what any leader must do." Haley screamed into her phone. "Oh my God! He's about to end this man's entire career." The terminal erupted into frantic chatter. Ethan looked at each of them, Amanda, Ryan, Harold, with eyes free of hatred, but also free of mercy. "The next chapter," he said slowly, each word falling like cold stone onto the polished floor, "will take place in the conference room. And all of you will be there." He walked away, followed by Daniel, by the airport staff, and by a wave of passengers clutching their phones. A storm named Ethan Marshall had begun to form, and everyone knew it was about to sweep away everything that needed to be erased. The emergency meeting room on the 3rd floor of Terminal 5 had never witnessed anything like this. Behind the clear glass walls, under the cold white ceiling lights, a long dark wood table sat waiting for the people who had unintentionally triggered the biggest crisis in the airline they served. Daniel Ortiz led Ethan Marshall inside, though in truth it looked less like Daniel guiding someone, and more like he was escorting a commander, surveying the battlefield after a clash. Several mid-level employees were already present. Faces, pale hands, clenched, some barely daring to breathe. They had seen the live stream. They had seen the comments. They had seen the Pacific Eagle logo being pulled straight into the eye of the storm on Twitter and TikTok. When Ethan walked in, the sound in the room dropped instantly, as if even the air molecules froze to stare at him. He said nothing for several seconds, simply pulled his chair and sat at the head of the table. No titles needed, no introductions. Everyone knew exactly who he was, and those who didn't only needed to look at the fear trembling in Daniel's posture to understand. Amanda Lewis and Ryan Cooper were escorted in last. They sat across from Ethan, stiff and tense, looking less like two employees attending an internal meeting, and more like defendants waiting for sentencing. Amanda kept her head down, hands gripping her shirt, hemmed tightly, while Ryan tried to look composed, but the beads of sweat running down his temples betrayed him. As soon as the door clicked shut, the confrontation began. Ethan opened his laptop, the glow reflecting against his face. "We will begin immediately," he said, his voice low, sharp, and impossibly steady, the kind of steady that carried authority stronger than shouting. He did not slam the table. He did not raise his tone. The silence around him was far more frightening than any outburst could ever be. He turned to Daniel. The initial incident began because the crew believed a so-called VIP held more rights than a passenger with a confirmed ticket, and because of that, they forced me out of my seat. Daniel took a breath. "Yes, sir." "According to their early reports." "We don't need reports," Ethan cut in. "We have evidence." He tapped a key, and the live stream footage appeared on the large screen mounted on the wall. Amanda's face filled the display, her rigid posture, her condescending tone. Ryan's irritated stance behind her, Harold Benson looming, and the exact moment Ethan was ordered to leave seat 1A. Everything captured indisputable. Amanda trembled immediately, hearing her own voice, hearing the arrogance she hadn't noticed in the moment, now amplified through a camera and replayed in front of the CEO, made those same words sound vicious. Amanda Ethan said, his voice quiet, but razor-thin. "Can you explain why you believed I was not the rightful occupant of seat 1A? Her lips quivered, but no sound came out. Ethan continued. "Was it because my clothes were not extravagant enough? Or because my skin was not the color you associate with wealth?" The room turned to stone. No one dared blink. Finally, Amanda broke, tears spilling as she choked. I didn't mean to. I thought." Ethan tilted his head slightly. Not angry, but exhausted by how familiar that excuse was. "You thought someone who looks like me could not possibly sit in first class." She could not answer. She could not even lift her eyes. Ryan jumped in, voice shaky. "Mr. Marshall, please, we just wanted to accommodate a VIP. Mr. Benson is a Platinum 10-year member." "He requested that seat." Ethan turned his gaze toward him. "And does he have any legal privilege that allows him to take another person's seat?" "No," Ryan stammered. But you treated his preference like an order. Meanwhile, my ticket was valid, and I didn't cause trouble. I asked for nothing but respect." Ethan paused, letting the weight of that final word fall deeply into the room. Daniel lowered his eyes. The others did as well. The shame in the room was suffocating, not because Ethan raised his voice, but because everything he said was true. Ethan turned to the management team. "This is not just individual misconduct. This is a systemic issue. This is the toxic culture I have warned about for years." He displayed the internal data. Next, discrimination complaints up 47%, legal settlement costs rising into the millions. When a company lets bias override policy, it shoots itself in the foot. And today he looked at Amanda and Ryan. "You pulled the trigger." Silence filled the room. Ethan placed his laptop down, fingers, interlocked eyes, not hateful, but resolute. The resolve of someone who knew that tolerating injustice today would plant the seeds of tomorrow's disaster. "I will not allow this to be dismissed. But I also do not wish to destroy anyone's life if they truly understand their mistake." Amanda sobbed softly, hands trembling. "I'm sorry I was wrong. I didn't realize." Ethan watched her for a long moment. "The frightening part, Amanda," he said slowly, each word sharp like a thin needle, "is not that you intended harm. It's that you didn't think at all. You acted on pure bias." Ryan kept his head, bowed eyes red, but dry fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. Ethan rose to his feet, making the entire room tighten in fear. "Daniel, draft disciplinary reports immediately. These two will be suspended pending the executive board meeting this afternoon." All eyes were locked on him. But he was not finished. And now Ethan turned eyes cold as Winter Wind bring in Harold Benson. The entire room jolted. Staff whispered. Haley in the back, still live-streaming, nearly dropped her phone. Ethan leaned back, voice dangerously calm. He believes he is an important customer. I will show him exactly how important he is. And as the meeting room door opened, revealing Harold Benson with a curious, slightly arrogant look on his face, everyone understood the most explosive part of this confrontation had yet to begin. The meeting room door swung open, and Harold Benson entered with the swagger of a man convinced he had been summoned for special treatment. He straightened his navy blazer, scanned the faces around the table, then lifted his chin with the confidence of someone who believed the entire meeting existed to accommodate him. But the moment his eyes landed on Ethan Marshall, seated at the head of the table, like the supreme judge of an unspoken court, Harold's half-smirk faltered. He still hadn't figured out who Ethan truly was, but his instincts, the same instincts that had helped him win deals for years, told him something was dangerously off. I was called in here because of that small incident, Harold said, with a mocking, dismissive smile. I hope you're not planning to make a big deal out of a seat. It wasn't worth all this. Several eyes shifted toward Ethan, and his silence immediately became punishment. Ethan knew how to turn quiet into a weapon. Daniel Ortiz stepped forward to open the discussion, but Ethan raised a hand. I will handle this myself. Daniel swallowed and retreated, looking like a man who had just stepped away from the edge of a blade. Ethan locked eyes with Harold, his expression calm, but carrying a pressure strong enough to make even this seasoned businessman pause. Mr. Benson, Ethan said, his voice steady and sharp as a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. You took a seat that was not yours. And not only that, you pressured the crew into removing the rightful passenger from the seat he paid for. Harold let out a dry laugh, though even he could hear that his usual confidence was missing. Listen, I'm a Platinum 10-year member. I'm entitled to request accommodations. Ethan tilted his head. Entitled to request, he repeated, or entitled to take. The air froze around them. Amanda stopped crying. Ryan's eyes widened. Daniel stiffened. Staff shifted in their seats. Harold frowned. I don't like your tone. Who do you think you are to speak to me like that? And that was the moment Ethan had been waiting for, the moment Harold tied his own noose. Ethan turned his laptop around. On the screen was a detailed breakdown of Pacific Eagle Airlines, its ownership structure, major shareholders, and one line that hit Harold like a punch to the chest. Marshall Aviation Group, 58% ownership. Ethan slid one more item across the table, a simple white business card. Ethan Marshall, Chief Executive Officer. I am the man you're speaking to, Ethan said. I am also the owner of this airline, and you are the man who convinced my staff to break policy because you believed you were above the rules. Harold stood frozen, all color drained from his face. Pure panic washed over him. That's impossible. I didn't know. That is the issue, Ethan replied softly, which somehow made the words hit even harder. You didn't know, you didn't care, and you believed wealth and privilege gave you the right to treat people as objects. Haley, still live-streaming through a crack in the doorway, covered her mouth to keep from screaming, while tens of thousands of viewers exploded in the comments. Ethan never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Mr. Benson, he continued, I know you run Benson and Hart Logistics, and I know you hold an $18 million annual cargo contract through Pacific Eagle's network. But what you don't know, he turned the laptop again, this time displaying a shareholder report, is that my group also holds 12% of your company. Harold stared at the screen as if the ground beneath him were breaking apart. Every block of power he thought he owned crumbled beneath his feet. Ethan continued, "You have two choices. First, you may terminate all existing contracts with us and remove your company from the Pacific Eagle system entirely." An audible gasp slipped from someone in the room. No one had expected Ethan to go that far. Second, Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice quiet yet blade-sharp. "You will write a formal apology, acknowledge your misconduct, complete a full bias awareness training program, and comply with oversight for 6 months." Harold trembled. "I choose Ethan cut him off before he could finish. I'm not done." The entire room tensed. Ethan continued, "You will also stand before the passengers, every person who witnessed your behavior, and apologize publicly the moment you leave this room. Clearly, directly, without excuses." Harold nearly collapsed into the chair behind him. He had spent years being treated like royalty, accustomed to being prioritized, pampered, obeyed. Now he was nothing more than a man standing at the edge of a cliff he had dug himself. I'm sorry, I'll do it," he whispered. Ethan nodded and recorded the terms into the report. "Good. Because you are not apologizing to me. You are apologizing to the system you helped rot." Harold rose unsteadily, shoulders shaking, guided toward the door by an employee. But before he reached the halfway point of the room, Ethan called out, "Mr. Benson." Harold turned eyes red. Remember, this power does not come from a first-class seat. Power comes from how you treat those without privilege. Harold lowered his head, the first genuine act of humility in his privilege-shielded life. When the door closed behind him, the room was silent. A heavy silence, like the ceiling was about to collapse. Ethan looked around the table. "Now," he said, "we address the internal damage." And when he stood, everyone knew the real earthquake was still coming. The moment Harold Benson left the meeting room, the glass door closed with a soft click that echoed like the lid of a coffin, sealing away the old, rotting privileges that had been allowed to exist for far too long. The air in the room thickened, tightened, as if every particle was being pulled toward Ethan Marshall, the eye of the storm now tearing through Pacific Eagle Airlines. All eyes were on him. Some people swallowed hard. Some barely dared to breathe. Amanda Lewis and Ryan Cooper sat hunched in their chairs, unable to meet anyone's gaze. They understood that if the scene with Harold had been thunder, then what waited for them would be the strike of the sky itself. Ethan rose, placing his hands lightly on the long wooden table. He didn't slam it. He didn't need to. Every subtle movement carried a weight that made it feel as if even the table trembled under a pressure no one else could see. He scanned the room before fixing his gaze on the two bowed heads in front of him. "Now," he said, voice low and cold, "we talk about real responsibility." Ryan gulped his throat dry while Amanda clenched her hand so tightly her nails dug into her skin, trying to keep herself steady, yet still unable to hide her trembling breath. Ethan opened his laptop, pulled up the page Employee Conduct and Ethics Section 12, then turned the screen for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is the code of professional ethics every Pacific Eagle employee has read, signed, and committed to uphold." He read each line slowly, like a fine blade sliding across polished wood. "No employee shall discriminate against any passenger based on race, gender, age, appearance, economic status, or any subjective assumption." He raised his head, his eyes piercing through them. "You violated all of it in less than 3 minutes." Ryan tried to speak, his voice cracking. "Mr. Marshall, I truly did not intend to discriminate. I was just following a VIP's request, and I, Ethan, lifted a single finger. Don't. One word. Enough to chill the entire room. The frightening part, Ethan continued, is not intentional discrimination. It's discrimination by reflex. When bias becomes instinct. Amanda broke into tears. They streamed down her uniform, leaving dark streaks across the fabric. "I am so sorry, I didn't know, I just thought—" "Exactly," Ethan replied, not harsh but sharp enough to slice through air. "You didn't know, and because you didn't know, you believed you had the right to decide who deserved to sit where." He looked directly at her. "And that destroys this profession." Daniel stood quietly in a corner, fists clenched. The statistics he ignored, the internal warnings he dismissed, all returned like crashing waves. Ethan turned the screen again, this time showing Haley's video. The recording displayed Amanda's cold face, ordering Ethan out of his seat, her judging eyes, her arrogant tone, and the barrage of comments flooding the screen. "Racist much OMG fire her. What era is this?" The video shifted to Ryan, stepping in authoritative voice, condescending posture, impatient expression. Ethan paused the video. At the moment, Amanda said, "Sir, don't make this hard for us." That line rang through the room like metal scraping against metal. Hard, Ethan asked. "I was sitting in the seat I paid for." The only thing difficult was the respect. No one in the room dared respond. Ethan closed his laptop and interlocked his fingers. Amanda Lewis. Ryan Cooper. He spoke each name with eerie clarity. "You didn't just make a mistake. You damaged the trust passengers place in our system. You put the reputation of this airline, the livelihood of thousands of employees at risk." He paused, letting every word settle heavy in their chests. "And most importantly, you harmed a person's dignity." Amanda choked on a sob. Ryan bowed his head, so low his forehead nearly touched the table. Ethan continued, "But I believe in change. I believe people can recognize their mistakes and relearn everything they thought they knew. Therefore, I haven't fired you. I will give you one last chance." The entire room jerked upward in shock. No one expected that. Ethan spoke clearly, every word deliberate. "You are suspended effective immediately, without pay." Amanda stammered, "Why, yes." And Ethan said, "For the next 3 months, you are required to attend retraining at the South Coast Aviation Service Training Center in San Diego." The room inhaled sharply. That center was notorious military-level discipline, brutal evaluations, zero tolerance for error. 3 months, Ethan repeated. High pressure, strict monitoring. Failure to pass the final evaluation means termination. Amanda covered her face and sobbed. Ryan nodded quickly. I agree. I'll do it. I'll learn. I promise." Ethan looked at them for a long, solemn moment, his eyes holding no hatred, only the heavy disappointment of someone who once believed in a better ideal. "Remember this," he said softly. "Today is not the day I punish you. Today is the day you receive the chance to rebuild yourselves." He leaned back in his chair. "Now let's talk about something more important than the two of you." The room held its breath. The system that allowed this to happen. Ethan turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Ortiz discrimination incidents increased by 47% this past quarter. Why were those warnings ignored?" Daniel opened his mouth, faltered, then answered in a small, ashamed voice, because no one thought it was serious. "Exactly," Ethan said, his voice dropping like thunder. "Not serious until the person targeted was the chairman of the company. One sentence, enough to strike at the conscience of the entire room." Ethan stood. "From today onward, everything changes." Eyes widened. Pens readied. Hands trembled. Ethan Marshall, the man thrown out of a seat in his own airline, now stood like someone rewriting the company's constitution. "I will announce a full series of new policies at the Executive Assembly this afternoon," Ethan said. And I want every department head present. We are rebuilding Pacific Eagle from the ground up." The room was silent. And then Ethan ended with one sentence that made everyone understand the old era had just died. "I don't want my airline to operate on privilege. I want it to operate on dignity." And in that moment, everyone in the room, including Amanda Ryan and Daniel, realized that today was not simply a crisis. It was the beginning of a new era for Pacific Eagle Airlines. An era where they no longer chased VIPs, but chased what was right. The moment the internal meeting at Terminal 5 ended, Ethan Marshall stepped out of the room like a storm that had passed through, but had not dissipated. The crowd of passengers still clustered around, many of them, glued to Haley's live stream, instantly raised their cameras toward him. More than 30 phones lifted at once, the blue and white glow of their screens illuminating the face of a man who had just been humiliated, yet now stood as if he were the one who had condemned an entire system. Ethan did not stop at Gate 52B. He did not need applause nor sympathy. He walked straight ahead, eyes fixed on the next step, the Executive Assembly meeting with the senior leadership of Pacific Eagle Airlines, a meeting that would define the company's future for years to come. Daniel Ortiz hurried behind him, his expression a mix of worry and resolve, far removed from the uncertainty he showed earlier. As Ethan entered the main hall of Terminal 5 Airport Security, and ground managers instinctively stepped aside, not out of fear, but respect, recognizing they were witnessing a man of real weight. An airport electric cart was dispatched immediately to transport him to the executive conference building. As the cart moved, passengers on both sides watched, many applauding. He did the right thing. Leaders like this are rare. This is incredible. Haley kept live streaming her voice, trembling with excitement. "Everyone is heading into a meeting with the executives right now. This is literally the most cinematic real-life moment I have ever filmed." Meanwhile, social media had exploded beyond imagination. The hashtags Ethan Marshall Pacific Eagle Racism and Justice in the Sky climbed to the top of national trending lists in less than 2 hours. Tens of thousands of comments poured in, many outraged, many emotional, and countless others digging into Ethan's background. When they discovered he was not just the CEO of Marshall Aviation, but also the architect behind 3 major industry reform successes, the story evolved from a case of discrimination into a masterclass on leadership for a new era. The cart stopped at the entrance of the executive building. Ethan stepped off his suit, perfectly pressed the warm overhead lights, casting a stark glow over his cold, determined expression. He entered the conference room on the 8th floor, where 17 senior executives of Pacific Eagle sat waiting, not one of them speaking. The air was so heavy, it felt like each second of the clock could be heard. Thomas Carter, 59 years old, the chairman of Pacific Eagle, stood. "Mr. Marshall," he said, his voice deep and heavy. We watched the entire live stream. Ethan did not respond immediately. He walked to the long table, set down his briefcase, opened it, and placed a thick stack of documents before him. No introduction, no preamble. He began instantly. "You saw it. You witnessed what happened. I do not need to repeat it." Several eyes dropped. No one dared meet his gaze. Ethan continued, voice calm but razor sharp. What happened today was not a coincidence. It was the product of years of neglect, months of ignored warnings, and weeks of internal reports shoved into drawers. He pressed a button, and the large screen lit up with data points. Customer satisfaction, down 22%. Discrimination complaints nearly doubled passenger trust at its lowest level in 8 years. "This is the portrait of an airline dying slowly," Ethan said. "And today it almost died again, live in front of the audience of a 22-year-old blogger. A few executives exhaled sharply at the sting of that truth. Thomas Carter grimaced. This is our failure. We will reinforce. No, Ethan cut in his tone, freezing the entire room in place. Reinforcement is not enough. We need complete overhaul. He slid the stack of documents toward Thomas. This is the restructuring plan I prepared 3 months ago. But today it is no longer a proposal. It is an order. He began listing each point, his voice steady, with the certainty of someone who had anticipated every step long before today. 1 all-cabin crew and ground staff, more than 12,000 employees, are required to attend a 40-hour bias recognition program. Failure to complete it results in suspension. No exceptions. 2. Install a real-time passenger feedback monitoring system on all 220 aircraft. Every negative report goes directly to the Senior Operations Office. 3. Establish an independent passenger ethics oversight committee consisting of 3 non-company members. 4. Rebuild the reward system. No more excessive prioritization based on loyalty tier. The only priority will be performance and fairness. 5. Publish monthly data on complaints and resolutions. 6. Create an annual $500,000 aviation training fund dedicated to underrepresented groups. By the time he reached the final point, the room was silent, completely. No whispers, no shifting chairs. Nothing but the weight of a man who had turned his humiliation into a blueprint for an industry's future. Thomas Carter rose, placed both hands on the table and said, "Mr. Marshall, I will sign immediately." Ethan nodded. Then, after a beat, he added, "There is one more matter." He placed a thinner document on the table. Its weight, however, felt immense. "This is the Senior Personnel Adjustment Order." An executive at the far end blurted out, "Are you firing someone?" Ethan looked directly at them, eyes steady, unblinking. "Anyone who received discrimination reports in the last 6 months and failed to act will be subject to immediate investigation." A ripple of panic swept the room. Some executives turned to each other, some went pale. Ethan lifted his hand, silencing the chaos. "This is not retaliation. This is to prevent this from ever happening again." Then he closed his briefcase and finished Pacific Eagle cannot survive if it continues flying on excuses and apologies. From this moment, we fly on truth. And in that moment, as the executives bowed their heads over the documents that would shape their future, everyone understood that Ethan Marshall was not merely repairing a single flight. He was preparing to redefine an entire sky. When Ethan Marshall left the executive conference room of Pacific Eagle Airlines, the comprehensive reform blueprint in his hands had officially been approved, and it sent an immediate shockwave through the entire operational system of the airline. From the Central Operations Center to every check-in counter, every cabin crew team, every ground unit, every technical group, everyone could feel clearly that they were stepping into a new era. Within 30 minutes, an email titled Directive 01. Emergency Cultural Reset was sent to all more than 18,000 employees of the airline. Each person opened the email with tension and curiosity, and as their eyes scanned the contents, whispers spread across airports from Los Angeles to Seattle, from Atlanta to Chicago O'Hare. Mandatory 40-hour bias recognition training. Install real-time feedback systems on every aircraft. Restructure rewards and internal oversight. Reinvestigate all complaints ignored in the past 6 months. A ground employee in Denver read the email with trembling hands. "My God, the CEO issued this personally." A flight attendant in Houston texted her friend, "It's real." They said there was a live stream. He got kicked out of the seat on the airline he owns. A service manager in New York pressed his fingers to his forehead. He warned us about this. 2 quarters ago we didn't listen. Meanwhile, in the airline's communications office, the phones rang non-stop. More than 40 calls from television networks, national newspapers, podcasts, and financial magazines all demanded interviews with Ethan. Major media outlets began broadcasting breaking news. CEO of Pacific Eagle removed from seat on his own airline. Discriminatory incident ignites nationwide outrage. Ethan Marshall, the most influential black leader in aviation, prepares historic reform. The story spread like wildfire across a dry field. Social media exploded entirely. Haley's live stream, which had run for 3 hours straight, reached 78,000 live viewers and more than 1.2 million replays by late afternoon. The comment sections were filled with anger, encouragement, emotion, and curiosity. I've never seen a CAO address the root cause like this. This should be taught in leadership courses. He didn't just react, he rebuilt. Pacific Eagle is about to rise again. Meanwhile, at the legal office of Benson and Hart Logistics, Harold Benson was living the deepest panic of his life. The clip of him bowing his head in apology on the live stream was being cut, edited, and spread across every platform. Major clients emailed demanding explanations. Shareholders called non-stop. His PR department sent him a 26-page crisis response file with one line highlighted full cooperation with Marshall Group's retraining program is necessary. Otherwise, more than 30% of annual contracts may be lost. Harold sat there, pale hands, shaking, unable to believe that one moment of arrogance had collapsed his entire career. As for Amanda and Ryan, both were ordered to report to the South Coast Aviation Service Training Center in San Diego that very afternoon. When they left LAX, no one spoke to them. Some employees gave them sympathetic looks, but most were filled with judgment. At the airport subway station, Amanda sat alone, tears clinging to her eyelashes, holding her suspension notice. Ryan sat a few seats away, gripping the strap of his backpack, staring blankly at the digital display board. They had no idea their actions were being discussed across the country, and they did not know that within a single day, they had become the defining example for the entire aviation industry about the cost of unconscious bias. Meanwhile, on the 15th floor of the Marshall Aviation Group headquarters in downtown Los Angeles, Ethan's executive team had already begun work. Technology specialists were designing the interface for the real-time passenger feedback system. Human resource experts were drafting the new bias training curriculum. Data managers were extracting all complaint records from the past 2 years for review. Ethan's voice echoed in the strategy room. "We are not fixing one aircraft. We are fixing the entire sky." The entire team sat up straight, their eyes bright, not from fear, but from the feeling that they were contributing to something far larger than themselves. And they were right, because this wave of reform began spreading beyond Pacific Eagle. CNN invited Ethan to speak about a new model of accountable leadership. The Wall Street Journal published, "Aviation Reform Begins in Seat 1A." Business Insider wrote, "A CEO faced discrimination on his own airline, and his response shook the entire industry." 3 major airlines, SkyJet American Air and Northline, released statements re-evaluating first-class service policies and ending preferential treatment models. Within just 2 days, the impact of Ethan's actions had spread so widely that national aviation associations convened an emergency meeting. Analysts named it the Marshall Event, a social turning point that people would still talk about decades later. But for Ethan, attention was never the goal. He wanted systems to change. He wanted dignity to become standard. He wanted to ensure that the humiliation he suffered that day would never happen to anyone else. That evening, as he left headquarters, the lights of Los Angeles reflected off the car window. He did not see them as glittering lights, but as reminders. The work had only begun. And in his mind, a single thought echoed. Tomorrow we continue writing history. Someone once said that a leader's true power is not shown when he is celebrated, but in the moment he is humiliated, and in how he rises afterward. Today, Ethan Marshall proved it, and tomorrow, the entire aviation industry would have to change to keep up with him. 6 months after the incident on that fateful flight, the name Ethan Marshall had risen far beyond the status of an ordinary CEO to become the symbol of a movement that reshaped an entire industry. The skies above America were no longer the same. Stories that occasionally surfaced about discrimination in aviation had all but disappeared, replaced by articles about genuine transformation, a transformation that began from a moment of injustice Ethan faced in Seat 1A. At the new headquarters of Marshall Aviation Group in Los Angeles, the glass walls reflected the morning sun, and inside glowing performance dashboards displayed the results of the reform. Customer satisfaction had risen from 3.1 to 4.7 in just 2 quarters. Discrimination complaints had dropped by more than 76%. Legal expenses had nearly vanished. Numbers once considered impossible now appeared clearly as a declaration that change was real, and that change begins when one is brave enough to confront the truth. Ethan stood before the window on the 27th floor, looking down at the traffic below, though his mind was far from the streets. He was thinking of the moment he had been ordered to leave Seat 1A, a moment that for anyone else might have been nothing more than an insult captured in a viral clip. But for him, it became the fuel that transformed an airline's entire operating system and even pulled an entire industry forward. His phone vibrated on the desk. A notification from Harvard Business School appeared. "We are officially adding case study Marshall Aviation Cultural Reset to this year's mandatory MBA curriculum. Please confirm your keynote presentation at Baker Hall." Ethan smiled faintly, not out of pride, but because he knew hundreds of students would learn how to use power to improve society, rather than merely maximize profit. The office door opened. Sarah Bennett, the communications director, stepped in holding a stack of documents. "Ethan, here is the consolidated report from other airlines. It looks like you've created a real domino effect." Ethan took the folder. Each page contained official statements from major airlines, American Wing, Northline, Skyjet, Aurora Air, all of them implementing real-time evaluation systems, bias training programs, and new disciplinary structures. He read a few lines and took a slow breath. "Good," he said. "It doesn't matter who gets the credit. What matters is that people are treated right." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. "There's something else. I think you'll want to see this." She handed Ethan her phone. On the screen was a TikTok video, Amanda Lewis, wearing the uniform of a small regional airline, standing in front of a classroom, teaching a lesson on the impact of bias in customer service. She said, "I once judged someone purely by appearance. That mistake destroyed my career. But thanks to the training program at Marshall Group, I know what I need to become a better person." The video had more than 1.5 million views. Ethan said nothing, but his eyes softened. Real change was never about firing someone. It was about helping them understand what is right. Sarah passed him another document, the financial report of Benson and Hart Logistics. Revenue had dropped 19%. 3 major contracts had been cancelled after the scandal. But at the end of the report was a screenshot of an email Harold Benson had written a formal apology to all his employees and announced he would enroll his entire leadership team in Marshall Group's training program. Ethan's eyes paused at one sentence. "I do not want to be the man the video portrayed me to be." Ethan nodded slightly. Learning the lesson is better than losing everything. In another corner of the city, at the South Coast Aviation Training Center, Ryan Cooper was instructing a new group of trainees. The arrogance he once carried was gone. He crouched down to adjust a student's seatbelt, speaking gently. "There is no such thing as an unimportant passenger. We serve everyone." The supervisor behind him noted quietly, "He's completely changed." These pieces, Amanda, Ryan, Harold, were not the villains of the story. They were proof that mistakes can become lessons when guided by someone brave enough to inspire change. And that someone was Ethan Marshall. That afternoon, as Ethan prepared to leave his office, his assistant walked in. "Ethan, the real-time feedback system is now activated across the entire fleet. The first monitored flight departs at 6 o'clock. Ethan allowed himself a rare smile, one not intended for cameras or the media, but for himself. "Good," he said. "Let the passengers tell us whether we deserve their trust." When Ethan stepped onto the rooftop terrace, the cool evening wind swept past him, carrying the distant roar of a departing aircraft. The city lights stretched beneath his feet like a sea of stars. He looked up at the sky, the place where his story began, the place where he was humiliated, the place where he stood up, and the place he chose to change the game. "The sky," Ethan murmured, "always has room for those who know how to fly in the right direction." And in that moment, he understood something with absolute clarity. The day he was removed from seat 1A was not the day he was diminished. It was the day he found his purpose to lift an entire system higher, and the fight for dignity today, tomorrow and forever, would always be a journey he was ready to continue. From the perspective of an expert in systems management and organizational behavior, Ethan Marshall's story is far more than a personal incident on a single flight. It is a sharp reminder of a truth many companies avoid. Confronting the greatest problems within an organization rarely begin with faulty technology or complicated procedures. But with the moment, people forget that every passenger, every customer, every individual holds equal value. A disrespectful remark, a misjudging glance, a decision rooted in bias, when repeated enough times inside a large system, they solidify into a toxic culture, one capable of harming anyone within it, even the CEO himself. What Ethan did was not merely respond to an insult. He delivered a foundational lesson. True power is not the ability to retaliate, but the ability to rebuild the system so that the wrongdoing can never repeat itself. He did not shift the blame onto individuals and ignore the deeper issue. He looked directly at the structure, the gaps, the habits that had been normalized over time. And that is the mark of a leader operating at a strategic level, someone who can transform pain into action, and action into lasting change. 6 months later, the numbers proved that Ethan's decisions did far more than protect the dignity of one person. They sparked an impact that reached millions of passengers. An airline revived. An industry awakened. A new standard of fairness established not through grand speeches, but through consistency and respect toward every single person in the system, no matter how unseen they might be. And if this story has made you think more deeply about the power of doing what is right, about how a moment of injustice can become the beginning of true justice, then do not hesitate to let us know you want more stories like this. Tap like if Ethan's journey inspired you. Subscribe so you never miss the stories of courage, transformation, and human strength in the modern world. And finally, leave a comment with the phrase justice. Now as a reminder that all of us, no matter where we stand, deserve respect and have the power to create change.